As Stuart mentioned, I served on the Board of Regents of the University of Houston system and now on the coordinating board, so I have some experience, learned the hard way over time, that hopefully I can share some of that with you. My first advice is a new regent is hit the ground running. Determine what areas you can add value to the board from your strengths. Join board committees where you have some experience and interest. For example, if you're an investment banker, consider finance committee. If your background is in accounting, consider the audit committee. If you have real estate experience, consider the facilities and construction committees. One thing to remember is all the universities have a deep bench of executives that work for the university in every field that you can rely on from an execution standpoint. So the staff is fully capable of executing any plan on their own, and the main job you have as a new regent is to set the vision and the mission for the university, and then rely on the staff to execute that direction. You were appointed to your board position because of your experience, so don't be afraid to speak up and voice your opinion, but think before you speak, because everything you say is on the record. Literally everything you say is on the record, so you need to be mindful of that in any commentary you make, because everyone takes it seriously. Always be aware of public information requests. There's no such thing as a separate meeting of the regents. Their open meetings are critical. Any member of the public, citizens, and the press can request any correspondence from you relating to specific items from your institution. So always be mindful that everything you do is as if you're doing it in public. So be mindful of that as you correspond and respond. Everything you say will be taken seriously. You don't realize the influence that you have, and so be careful what you say before you speak. For example, if you make a comment that wouldn't it be nice to have yellow flowers in the garden over there, you may show up next time and there are yellow flowers in the garden. Not that there should be yellow flowers, but they assume that you know what you're talking about and know the exact species, etc. So you need to be careful of just personal suggestions that aren't part of the mission of the university. The biggest problem facing all of us in higher education is, in my opinion, two items. One is dealing with students who come to college who are not prepared for college, and that's a challenge for all of the university systems. We accept all students in different institutions, and not all of them are prepared for college. And so, in my opinion, making sure that your institution, has the procedures and policies in place to deal with those students and get them up to speed as quickly as possible, you're really doing those students a favor and your institution a favor, because the institutions will have to spend a lot of resources and time just getting certain cohorts up to speed for university life, because we all want them to be successful. The second item is graduation rates. It's a shame to have a student go to college, probably take out student loans, et cetera, and not get something as a result. A certificate, an associate's degree, a four-year degree, that's a results-based outcome that we all should strive for. Just having somebody come, take on debt, do the time, and not have anything to show for it that will help them in their life and getting jobs and stuff is a shortcoming. So, in my opinion, focusing on those outcomes is very important. We owe it to the students and the state of Texas to get them something for their time and effort. When I first became a regent, I naively thought that the state of Texas funded the majority of the costs of higher education in Texas, and I was surprised to find out that the state of Texas, really funds less than 30% of the total cost. So all the other costs, come from other sectors, donations, tuitions, and other things. So it's a total involvement of the whole community for the success of a university. We cannot just rely on the state anymore to fund the programs. So you always need to be thinking about when you're considering new programs, where's the money coming from? Because it is important that all of the institutions in Texas be financially successful, and that's the only way they can deliver the goods and products for the students. Last thing, you'll be respected because of your position, not because of your good looks. So you're here not because of your good looks, Jack and Phil. You're surprisingly enough, you're here because of your position. And just because now you're referred to as the Honorable Regent, don't let that go to your head, because trust me, as soon as your term expires, to quote Welcome Senior, you will go from who's who to who's he. So going back into private life, you look around and all of a sudden no one's there to give you accolades and pat you on the back. So just remember that. And so that's my advice. So thank you very much.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. I should begin by saying that because of my 27 years of service in Texas Public Higher Education Administration, that I probably had an advantage as a new board member when I was appointed last summer to fill an unexpired position on the Del Mar College Board of Regents, which ordinarily I would have had to run for and had to think about for a long time and, prepare and study and everything. So I had about a month, though, to get letters of recommendation, to decide I was going to do it, and so on. But my experience did include a couple of regional institutions in the A&M system, the A&M main campus and the A&M system offices. So I dealt with things from a lot of different perspectives. But this switch in roles was reminiscent to me, when I thought about it, of when I exchanged my press pass and reporter's notebook for a university public relations role. You suddenly have to look at things from another perspective. I know about administration, and I've worked with boards of regents, but it's different when you're on the other side, and you're suddenly thinking, what's management, what's too much, where am I getting into micromanagement, where's the policy line? And I think that's an area that is probably one of the hardest things, I think, for people to deal with. So I was aware of the Texas Open Meetings Act, the Texas Public Information Act, which I lived with for 27 years, and you say, don't put anything in an email, don't say anything you don't want to see on the front page of the paper, essentially, when you're in a public role. I knew about higher education funding and budgeting, especially for four-year institutions. I knew about the role and the requirements of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. And I knew many of the coordinating board requirements and about the strategic plan. I know some of the higher education law issues that come up that get institutions into trouble, and strategic planning also, which was my background. And I understood, as I was saying, that at least theoretically, that distinction between being on a governing board versus being part of the institutional management. I think that is, for me, a real growing edge. It was a good thing I had the knowledge base, because at the meeting where I was one of 3 finalists interviewed and then selected, I was sworn in, shown my seat, how to work the mic, given the board book, and the meeting continued while that was happening to the budget discussion. So they didn't waste any time in getting down to business. But I can imagine if I had been a complete newbie, it would have been drinking from the fire hose. I just can't even, there's so many things that, as someone new that could, especially if you're completely new to the public sector and have never dealt with those public sector laws, that can not just trip you up a little bit, but actually get you in real trouble. So you really need to pay attention to those things. And I did talk to fellow regents who didn't come to the role with a background in higher ed about what they wish they had known, and many of the things that I just mentioned were things that they brought up. So despite my ability to sort of be a walk-on for the college and doing my homework and looking at the statutory requirements, there were still areas in which I need more knowledge, and that one of those is this greater depth of understanding of the fiduciary role. My background is not in finance, but I'm still, as one of 9, need to vote on those things, so I need to have a better understanding of that. And more understanding of the community college funding. I really understand four-year institutions. I'm not as familiar with the community college. I know the legs of it, but I don't know the details of it. And this goes back to the same thing, the working relation between a board and an institution, where those lines are, what's the appropriate to do in those areas, and the role of a regent in legislative relations. And when you're called on to do that, which many of you probably will be, how does that work? What's appropriate, basically? I'm still learning more about the college itself. Although I worked in Corpus Christi at the institution there and worked closely with the college, and I know something about it, but boy, I can't begin to know everything about it, and never will. But I need to know more than I know. So I'm trying to bring myself up to speed on details about the college. So just in closing, I'd just like to, thank Mary, I think, for asking me to be on this panel, Dr. Mary Smith, and say that I feel really privileged to work with Dr. Mark Escamilla, who is our president, and the team he's assembled, and a great board of regents for a wonderful institution in Corpus. So I'm really privileged to be there, and I want to do the best that I can for our students. Thank you. Yes.
Howdy. So there's no Aggies in here? Howdy. Okay. I thought there would be. So my role on the panel is to represent the CEOs and to offer to you some practical advice that probably your CEO is either shy about saying to you or otherwise wants to deepen the relationship before they get that blunt with how things ought to be. And I keep getting invited back here either because I'm an Aggie and I haven't learned my lesson yet, or because the advice that we offer resonates with the CEOs in the room. So in your package, you're going to find a lot of links that are really valuable resources about what it means to be a trustee or a regent. Study those, because it's really good stuff. What I'd like to highlight today, if I could, are the 3 duties that are most important from the perspective of the CEO, and to highlight the difference between governance and management. Because it's at that nexus that most of the problems occur in the governing board CEO model. And it occurs when either the board overreaches into management or management abdicates their role as a leader of the company. Those are the 2 symptoms that occur. And I want to show you some practical ways you can find out if that's happening. So here's your 3 primary duties that are really important from a CEO aspect. First is protect the institution. Be sure you're monitoring what's going on in the institution from the standpoint of institutional health. Are we fiscally sound? Do we have public relations risks? Are our audit functions sound and robust? Those kinds of monitoring of those organizational health things. Are we free from outside influence? A major one with Sachs, our accreditor. And those are done at the policy level. You charge your management to execute those plans, but you work with management to develop the policies that govern them. Number two, this is really important. The board must manage itself. Let me say that again. The board must manage itself. Your CEO is your hired professional manager. Your CEO should be charged with running the institution day in and day out, and should have 100% of her or his efforts focused on that institution. And every minute the CEO spends managing a board is a minute stolen from the college's operations. So the board should manage itself. You'll have drama. There always is. Manage that drama and don't ask the CEO to be the referee. Because when you do, you'll jeopardize the health of the organization. And then the final one is your main duty: select and support your CEO. If your CEO needs strengthening, help them strengthen. If your CEO needs replacing, replace her or him. Have a CEO you have confidence in, and then work in a partnership with them and expect them to manage. So that last one, by the way, is the real biggie, because it's right there in that relationship between the board and the CEO that the dysfunction can occur in the governing CEO model. When the board overreaches or the CEO abdicates, that's when the problems begin to occur. Now, we developed this handy tool to help you. The healthy board CEO models work when the board governs and managers manage. That's when it really, really works. So the board set policy, they monitor organizational health, they work at a high level, it's a matter of scale, and then they hold their managers accountable for execution. Hold accountable, execution. When boards begin to execute, you have a problem there. So we've discovered that a good way to indicate to yourself whether your board is at the right level, is actually governing and not managing, is in the questions they ask. So you'll find right behind your agenda this matrix. Now, the questions on the left side of the page are literally questions handed to me by my fellow CEOs in higher ed. These are actual. And here's some examples of them. This is one of my favorites. How many gallons of gas do we use in our police cars? That's a literal question asked by a board member. And when a question like that hits the board table, then chances are you've forayed into management as opposed to policy. Governance and policy, that question would sound more like this, the one on the right. Tell me about our energy management policies, and how do we know they're effective at reaching their goals? Now that's the difference between micromanaging and policy. Another one further down, in the first box, I love these, is how much do we pay our teachers, or who got a raise this year, or, and this one actually I got asked, will you hire my brother-in-law? That literally I got asked that. Now, over on the right side, probably better questions that indicate a board managing or governing at the right level is, do we have a compensation philosophy? How do we benchmark it against the industry? How do we, and how does it impact our turnover rate? How do we know we have the right kind of talent? Those kind of governing questions would probably be more appropriate. So what I would offer to you is look through these actual questions here that have been asked in college boardrooms, and then look at the alternatives and see if they offer you insight into the roles played by a governing board versus a manager. And so I'll leave it with this. Boards govern and managers manage. And your CEO is your hired professional manager. Support them or don't. But what you shouldn't do is, if your CEO is not fulfilling her or his job, help them or replace them, but don't do their job for them. That way, you'll have the right balance of governance and management in a situation that ensures a healthy organization that remains strategically relevant to its mission, appropriately healthy and vibrant in achieving that mission, and one that's future-proof because you're able to balance the near-term needs with the long-term through the governance and management process. And so with that, I've offered you what your CEO wishes you to know. And as an Aggie, we'll see if I say yes again if I get invited back.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, I've got a question. I mean, there is a continuum here of being pure governance and pure, and then micromanaging. But I've got a question for you, Mike. So you have extended, which I'm snoozing on my calendar, an invitation for me to come visit one of your campuses. And I will get there. But you have one, I think, in Waco, one in Richmond, and several others. So a board member, on your board, as a new board member, say he goes to each of your campuses and just takes a tour. I mean, don't you think that would be appropriate?
There's no doubt that's appropriate. I'll tell you what would be inappropriate is to have a board member just show up at one of the campuses.
Gotcha. So
I think that's disrespectful to the management, that your management is your professional hired manager, and to just show up without the courtesy of, I want to go see this. There's even the opportunity to discuss, I want to go without a chaperone, but I don't think it's appropriate to show up without talking to your CEO.
And that makes perfect sense. But what if...
And with that in mind, I'll tell you this. I'm aware of colleges who actually have offices on their campus for regents. And I would ask, how much time are you spending as a regent that it would require an office?
Yeah.
And are you supplanting the duties of management while you're spending time that close to the action?
Well, okay, so my question, whether on these visits, by your board or any board, to each of these campuses, whether chaperoned or not, I mean, they're going to learn issues. They're going to hear about either problems or successes or failures or complaints. What does the regent or board member do when he hears those complaints vis-a-vis the CEO?
So what I would say is you interact with the CEO. If the CEO, the one employee that the board hires, two, the CEO and the auditor, those are the two employees you hire. Those are the only people you manage. Everybody else works for the CEO. And so if there's a problem operationally in the college, you always begin and end with the CEO. I am accountable for everything that occurs on my campus, whether I did it or not. I'm accountable as the CEO. So when things don't go right, you come straight to me and you hold me accountable for things not going right. And what I would say is if you got a complaint from the public, for example, you would sit with the CEO and say, share with us how is this a problem? Yes or no? If it isn't a problem, why isn't it? And have the CEO explain to you, here's the situation. Reaching in and fixing it means you're doing the CEO's job, and you probably have the wrong CEO.
Okay, well, that makes sense. It's a fine line because, you start to get, you develop relationships at those campuses, and I mean, it's inevitable. But I think that's good advice. Come back to the CEO and raise those issues and concerns with him or her.
And if I could, I'll offer you this too. I think oftentimes a board member will cross the line into management when they begin to direct as opposed to query. If a board member asks, what are we doing about this? How do we know that works? If it's a series of questions, then the relationship is probably working properly. But as soon as a board member begins to direct, particularly individual board members, begins to direct, I want this, then they are operating as an individual as opposed to a body, and you have probably ventured off into management.
Yeah, but I think Welcome's yellow flowers were probably beautiful. Anyway, all right. So I want to ask a question of Welcome, since he was a U of H regent, and I'm not really. I mean, just say a regent of a university with a football program, not naming names, but say, this particular football program offense is great, but the defense gets gashed every single week. And as a regent, just say, Welcome, you're the regent, unnamed university, and you know a little bit about football. You played, junior high, football, and your analysis is that the problem is with the secondaries coach, who happens to be the brother-in-law of the defensive coordinator. So, Welcome, how do you fix the defense as a regent?
Well, just to set the record straight, I had a stellar junior high football career. And due to some unforeseen talent issues and others, I did not carry on to college football and other things, but I do have some ideas. Although you may know the play that should be called or how to fix it, as a regent, you need to keep that information to yourself. The last thing the coach or the institution needs is regents sending in plays on the field. But I do have a question for Michael real quick. I was just thinking here out of curiosity, does A&M or UT have more low flush toilets? I was always wondering that, and I didn't know.
Sometimes both are full of it, so we have to wonder.
But by the way, okay, so we kind of started off with a few questions. I'm sure the members of the audience have questions. I think there are wireless mics around. So anyway, if somebody has a question, please raise your hand, because these are really important issues about governance versus management and micro managing as a governing board member. So any questions? So I'll ask a question of Mary then. So you said that one of the big issues that new governing board members face is just understanding, being on a public board and sort of issues related to that. How long? I mean, your observation. You've been there since June.
Yeah, latter part of June.
How long does it take for a new board member to get up to speed, and what can he or she do to accelerate that process?
That's a good question. Coming in, someone who comes in with absolutely no background in the Public Meetings Act or the Public Information Act, I would say there's training, and you really need to do that ASAP. If you haven't done it before you're elected or appointed, do it immediately. And if you have questions about it, you have counsel you can ask, typically at your institutions or your president, that can fill you in on the details if you, when you do it, have any questions about it. But getting up to speed on those, I think, is very, very important, so that you don't do something bad for the institution or get yourself in trouble.
But how do you learn? I mean, beyond just the public board, rules, the state laws, how do you learn more about the institution and the issues facing the institution beyond just attending board meetings and reading materials?
In my case, I live in the community, so I have some idea of those, but I think you have to listen to your president and see what he tells you or she tells you is what the things the institution is facing. But studying the numbers, and that can be daunting too, because if you don't have some background in higher education statistics and so on, they can be difficult to understand. So actually asking for some training and looking at the numbers that relate to your institution and what they truly mean, asking for that kind of training would be a great thing also.
I've got a question for Mike, and just so we live as a public institution, public agency, in a political world, and so the legislators are keenly interested often in issues. What is the role of your board members vis-a-vis the legislature, and is there a way to encourage? I mean, how do you use them as resources vis-a-vis the legislature, or do you?
I think each institution is different, but I would argue for this is the most harmful thing you can do to a legislator or elected official is to send them mixed signals, is to speak to them about too many topics and to offer them what appears to be a chaotic or a disjointed vision of what your institution is. You could use board members, you could use executives, you could use donors, you can use all kinds of folks to try to influence the legislative process for the benefit of your institution, but you have to work off a common playbook. You have to make sure that everybody is saying exactly the same thing. Because as soon as you walk into one of those offices and one regent has said this and the other regent has said that, then you're causing that dissonance. It just causes the legislature to lock up. So I would say use regents are off, particularly those selected by the governor, are usually successful business people who are politically active to begin with. And so they can be accomplished in the legislative process and really benefit an institution. The problem is if they go rogue, if they go on their own and they begin to speak about things that are off point to the priorities of the institution at that particular time. So be unified in the way you approach it.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're actually having a board retreat, which is kind of strange. It's not really a retreat, which kind of implies that well, nobody else is invited. It's a public meeting, and it's after our committee meetings in December 12th, but for 2 hours, we're going to talk about that very thing, the coordinating board. Okay, what are our legislative priorities? What are the messages that we want to communicate to the legislature and politicians? Welcome. What is your experience as U of H regent, in the legislative process, and how did the Renew and Jason coordinate your efforts?
Well, Mike's right that the coming up with a common sound and vision for your university is important with the legislators. They're all going to have opinions, especially those that might be alumni from your institution, have their own interests. The main thing is I'd say to develop as a board, prioritize a list and stick with the playbook and deal with the most important things only. And every board should kind of determine from a legislative standpoint what's important for them for the next upcoming session, and then all come out with a common playbook, and then hit those high points when you meet with a legislator, and to have every regent, no matter whether they're informally or formally in front of them, hit those high points so that it really communicates a common goal and theme on behalf of the university.
I'll build on Welcome's comments. The work with the legislature is not a one-punch knockout. That's not how the work is done well. It's like driving a nail. Takes consistent tap, 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 and you've got a whole bunch of nails that you're trying to hit, and those blows need to be true and aligned, or you'll bend the nail. And so each contact with every legislature needs to have integrity to those priorities.
I'd like to add to that. You may find that if you're going on legislative visits, you're going to meet with staff, not the legislator. That's also equally important. Do not think that because you're not meeting with the legislature, you're meeting with staff, that you're not getting the ear. It's very important.
One other thing I would add is that during this actual session, the legislature is covered up with thousands of items that they're dealing with, staff and the legislators themselves. And so any kind of early groundwork, if you have priorities, meeting with them when things are quiet before they're in session is very important to, like Mike said, hit that nail and kind of, hit those points to where those points are crisp in their mind. If you wait until the legislative session, it's a tough haul because they're covered up with a lot of things, and they're always happy to meet with you, but you really make your most impact if you can do it before the session and just drive home your priorities. And so where they can, when you leave, hopefully they'll remember 2 or 3 things you said, and if everybody's saying the same things, those will get stuck in their mind.
Yeah, I think you'll find that for the new board members and trustees, this is a very important topic, and clearly it's another world. It's been another world for me, and as a member of the coordinating board and now chair, just how important this legislative process is. No questions from the audience? Here's a question.
I'll just ask since I'm close. With respect to the community colleges, a lot of boards are transitioning from at-large to district members. Do you have any comments about that? Not the other way around. They're not going district at large. They seem to be going from at-large.
Okay, this is my board is appointed by the governor. So what I will offer you is observations of operations within my colleagues in the 2-year sector, and things that do well and things that don't do well. District trustees often run with an agenda. They have a matter, or they have a geography that they're very concerned about. And then when they hit the boardroom, they can manifest that loyalty in a way that precludes the whole institution's integrity and protection. So what I would say is the time that when I see CEOs struggle with the governance and the management balance, it is usually when a board fails to unify around a common vision because of the fraction nature of locally elected trustees, particularly if trustees are so strong-willed that they bend the institution to the benefit of their district over the others. And I've heard CEOs share their angst over that sort of thing, because the CEO is the CEO for the whole college and not each individual district. And so the tension manifests itself in right there in the CEO board situation. The other thing is my comments about don't force the CEO to run the board, run yourself, tends to get overrun when that happens. So, but the point is this: your first loyalty should be to the institution, and your second loyalty to the district that you represent. Because as soon as you lose your first priority, which is the integrity of the whole organization, then you've created a system that is very troublesome.
Yeah, good question. You know, the coordinating board, I'm pretty sure by design, we have geographic and institutional representation. But as I'll mention briefly at lunch, you know, the coordinating board's duty is to the entire state of Texas. And yet, I found, you know, those perspectives are important. You know, the knowledge from those institutions or geographies are important to the debate and discussion, but they shouldn't govern, you know, decisions. So.